A Tory MP has defended a government advisor after claims she invoked future press regulation to suppress a newspaper's coverage of Culture Secretary Maria Miller's expenses. The Daily Telegraph has released a recording in which the advisor mentions the Leveson inquiry while being asked by a journalist about Mrs. Miller. But MP Therese Coffey said Mrs. Miller's elderly parents had been doorstepped. She said advisor Joanna Hindley was just suggesting that was inappropriate. The release of the Telegraph's recording, which dates from December 2012, comes at the end of a week in which Mrs. Miller was told to repay £5,800 in mortgage interest claims and apologise to Parliament for failing to cooperate with a parliamentary inquiry. Flag up. In the recording, Miss Hindley is answering a query from a Telegraph reporter when she points out that another reporter from the paper had doorstepped Mrs. Miller's father, who had just come out of hospital. She goes on to say Mrs. Miller had been having quite a lot of editors' meetings around Leveson at the moment, before adding, "So I am just going to flag up that connection for you to think about." In its leader column, the Daily Telegraph says that referring to Mrs. Miller's involvement in deciding press legislation in order to convince her to back away from getting straight answers, was an indictment of the influence that press regulation by statute could have over free speech. It adds, if our MPs cannot hold an honest conversation about regulation of their own expenditure, how can we expect them to hold an honest conversation about the maintenance of the free press? But Miss Coffey, who sat on the Culture, Media and Sport Committee between 2010 and 2012, told BBC Two's Newsnight that she had heard the recording and believed the special advisor had been trying to protect Mrs. Miller's elderly parents from press intrusion. Therese Coffey played down the importance of the Leveson reference. She said, "I heard an advisor to the Culture Secretary suggesting that it's inappropriate to be doorstepping elderly parents of somebody who has just come out of hospital." Earlier David Cameron's official spokesman, Craig Oliver, had denied claims he had threatened the former editor of the Telegraph over the Leveson inquiry in relation to the story. Dr. Coffey said, "The issue about Leveson has been going on for some time, but I have not seen any change in newspapers' attitudes in wanting to publish what they wish." Freedom of Information campaigner Heather Brooks said the Telegraph reporter who visited the house had been carrying out a public interest piece of reporting. The paper reported in December 2012 that Mrs. Miller had claimed £90,000 in expenses towards the mortgage on the South London property where her parents lived, while designating her main home as a rented property in her constituency of Basingstoke. Miss Brooks said that the journalist had no choice but to visit the property to establish the facts of who was living there and that it was disingenuous to use this argument of privacy